Welcome back to LimQ Plus, everyone. On this channel, I'm 100%ing Breath of the Wild by a bit every day until Tears of the Kingdom comes out, which is today in 48 days. Happy Friday. I'm currently in a little bit of a recording session as I'm on a little bit of a trip. We talked about this yesterday. Last time I went on a trip, the Tears of the Kingdom artbook got leaked. So who knows? I'm probably going to be leaving out of the door, and the second I leave, the game gets dropped. I'm pretty sure something like that is going to happen. If it does happen, we'll talk about it on Monday. But for today, what I want to talk about is theorizing Tears of the Kingdom's arrow types. Now, we already know, at least pretty surely, about one new arrow type. Do I still have a keys eye on this file? If not, I'm kind of curious where I dropped it. But what I'm talking about is the homing arrow. The homing arrow has appeared in the recent Tears of the Kingdom trailer. Link is fighting one of those new keys-looking enemies, shooting the arrow and it homes in. I had previously said how underwhelming that arrow type is for me, as somebody who's basically able to get bullet time wherever you want. Homing arrows seem very useless if you can essentially take all of the time in the world to specifically aim your shots. But people have brought up fair points about it, like the existence of mid-air combat, which might make bullet time more restricted. I personally even went as far as to thinking that bullet time might not even be a feature in the game because of how broken it is. Not only from a glitched perspective, but even from a combat perspective, it makes a lot of the content very easy, in my opinion. From a canon perspective, you could even say, okay, the bullet time was Link's champion abilities, and the champion abilities are all guns, so maybe you can't go into bullet time anymore, but let's not speculate about this today. What I want to speculate about is arrow types that I think could work in Tears of the Kingdom and that I would think would actually be useful. Now, as always, I'm not going to be using the art book for my speculation here, so let's get into it. The first arrow type is something that I always talked about, which I always thought made a ton of sense, and this would be a wind arrow. It is actually kind of weird how we basically have a fire arrow representing Eldin. We have a ice arrow kind of representing Lanayru, a shock arrow which is very prevalent in Gerudo Town, and then I guess you can buy bomb arrows in Rito Village, but I always thought a wind arrow would have made more sense. Now, what would a wind arrow actually do? I personally have two ideas on how to make a wind arrow pretty useful. Idea number one would be an arrow to literally create updrafts. Now that Revali's Gale is potentially going to be gone in Tears of the Kingdom, having a quick option to create updrafts other than burning chilies or wood, which is a thing, and high-level combat players you'll see all the time use those mechanics. Use that all the time to create updrafts wherever they go. You can technically also shoot fire arrows on grass, but having an arrow that can literally just spawn an updraft wherever you are, I think would have some unique uses, not only for puzzles, but if bullet time was in the game, it would be really useful for that. It would make traversal more interesting. So having a utility arrow instead of one that's specifically good for damage, I think is a really cool idea. Now, speaking of utility, another way you could make this arrow work, in my opinion, would be to give it some form of crowd control. Now, crowd control is a term that you usually hear in games like, I guess, like MMORPGs or MOBA games. Essentially, they mean some way to control, usually, enemies. So imagine the Gale or Wind Arrow kind of has like this vacuum, so you shoot it in the middle of a monster camp and then it groups all enemies together, making things like, you know, using the Blizzard Rod, which the Blizzard Rod is already the most broken weapon in the game anyway, because it has AoE, area of effect. But yeah, using those more effectively, like Blizzard Rod, bomb arrows, being able to get a big plunge attack or spin attack on multiple enemies off at once. I think having that sort of wind/vacuum arrow would be really useful and would make for some cool combat. Another arrow type that I've been thinking about is actually completely different. Again, I'm going to be mostly talking, I think, about utility arrows today, because we kind of have everything I can think of in terms of damage. We even have ancient arrows in the game, which might not be there anymore, honestly. Thinking about the fact how little ancient gear we've seen in Tears of the Kingdom. But they can literally completely destroy an enemy. Bomb arrows are super explosive and good at dealing damage. We have ice arrows, which allow you to then do a follow-up hit for triple damage. Like damage, we have tons of different options to deal damage in this game. I theory-crafted some more arrow types that would be more interesting for utility. In the next version that I would think of would be a buff arrow. Now, again, I'm coming from a background from MMORPGs, MOBA games, competitive games. So abilities like that are very common in those games, but I think they would translate really well into Tears of the Kingdom. Now, how would a buff arrow work? Let's say you shoot an arrow on the ground and it creates a field on the ground that you can then use to... I don't even know why I went to the shrine. I think this is my old shrines muscle memory. I haven't really been completing many shrines, but you know, might as well. So let's say you shoot that buff arrow onto the ground, it creates a field, and in that field, let's say Link deals 50% more damage. This would be both restrictive in the way that you cannot leave your area. To be honest, it sounds pretty broken if you could just create multiple areas on the ground. They definitely shouldn't stack. Like, it shouldn't work that you shoot 5 buff arrows onto the ground and then you do like 400% damage. Only having one on the ground at one time could be cool. There's a really challenging enemy coming up, and let's say those buff arrows would be really hard to craft. You shoot it on the ground, it creates the field, and now in the field you can use other arrows to deal 50% more damage, but it restricts you running around more because you have to stay in the field to do that damage. That's just an idea I've been playing around with. Now, another very common arrow type, in my opinion, and for a good reason, because I think it could be pretty cool, is a poison arrow. A poison arrow kind of like promotes a very interesting, different playstyle against specifically tough enemies. Kind of letting you live out that thief, like stealthy fantasy. Now, a poison arrow would basically work in a way that it does very little base damage. Maybe less or the same amount than a normal arrow. But it does poison the enemy, maybe immediately, maybe after a couple shots, which will then make them take damage over time. Those specific arrows could, again, kind of promote a playstyle where you're actually taking on enemies that are stronger than the enemies you should be fighting at this particular point of your playthrough, but you can still take them on by using those tools. So let's say you meet a Lionel early on, you're too weak, but you can like kind of hide, shoot a couple poison arrows and let the poison do the work, and maybe get your hands on some powerful gear earlier than you're supposed to. Again, I kind of just like the idea of a poison playstyle, and that's something I think they could make work. Now, I will take another idea directly out of the Elden Ring playbook. At this point, my channel is pretty much known to be an Elden Ring channel. Well, to be fair, if you've ever checked out my main channel, I have made some Elden Ring videos in the past. It is one of my favorite games of all time. But the reason I'm telling you this again is because, wait, I've completely forgot that I still have to get the Spring of Wisdom. I don't know when the best point to do that will be. Maybe after I get the Korok seeds here. One playstyle that Elden Ring features, or it's not, I wouldn't really call it a playstyle, it's a variant of builds, is blood or bleed builds. What these builds do is usually they do a little bit less flat out damage, but they build up a little meter called blood or like bleed meter, and when that meter is filled, let's say you have performed like 5 or 6 consecutive attacks on an enemy, they bleed. And what bleeding does is that it does percentage HP damage. So the more HP an enemy has, the more damage it does. So if you're fighting a super strong enemy, these builds are really effective as long as you keep playing aggressive as you get those hits in. And if you're fighting like more nimble, less tanky enemies, they might not be as effective. But I think it's just a really cool, very satisfying playstyle. And given the fact that we are likely dealing with a more meaningful blood moon in that specific theme this time, maybe that's something we could actually see. Blood arrows might work differently in Tears of the Kingdom, and given that we're talking about a Nintendo game here, I think they might shy away from making enemies literally bleed. So I don't know how that specifically works in games ratings these days, but that's something we might not see for simply that reason. But those were some arrow types that I've been thinking about and that I think could work in Tears of the Kingdom. My most favorite one, and I always thought it really should have been in the game, is the Gale/Wind arrow. I think that sort of arrow type should be in this game already and absolutely would have a place in Tears of the Kingdom. So maybe we'll see that. I haven't really thought about how they would be crafted yet. If we consider and if we think that the homing arrows are crafted by using a Keyseye, technically we could now go through Breath of the Wild's inventory and kind of piece together what specific monster part would likely actually make that certain arrow. But that might be a topic for a different video. This specific Korok, which is the last one I was planning on getting today, is always giving me trouble. Is it this one? Okay. There's always one like hidden on a random cliffside, and I tend to struggle quite a bit finding it. But this is where I'm gonna end it for the day. Tomorrow I will be making my way back up to Mount Lanero, finally getting that Spring of Wisdom out of the ground to get that location, and then start working my way through Akala. We are now on 94%. Tears of the Kingdom will be out in 47 days tomorrow. I hope you guys enjoy the beginning of your weekend, and I will see you tomorrow.